From the moment Kanan Jarrus entered the narrative of the early rebellion, it became clear that his interpretation of the Jedi identity diverged sharply from the institutional norms that once defined the Order. Unlike the traditional Jedi who relied on rigid doctrine, hierarchical oversight, and standardized methods of training, Kanan evolved within an environment shaped by loss, survival, and shifting galactic priorities. This context produced a practical, adaptive understanding of the Force that addressed gaps the pre-war Jedi never resolved. By analysing Kanan's methods, decisions, and instructional practices, it becomes evident that he embodied a model of Jedi leadership built on principles the Order struggled to apply during its final century. Kanan's development as a mentor began outside the influence of formal structures, allowing him to construct an approach grounded in observation rather than rule. His training during the Clone Wars provided foundational skills, but the abrupt dismantling of the Order forced him to interpret the Force through independent experience rather than institutional interpretation. This independence gave him the flexibility to respond to circumstances without concern for council approval or traditional expectations. Instead of applying a standardized template of instruction, he adapted his teachings to the individual needs of those he guided. This adaptability contrasted with the pre-war system, which prioritized consistency over personalization. The result was a methodology shaped by context rather than doctrine. Kanan's approach to interpersonal connection demonstrated a significant departure from the Order's long-held concerns regarding attachment. The pre-war Jedi treated emotional bonds as potential destabilizing forces that threatened clarity and judgment. Kanan, however, developed relationships that informed his decision-making without compromising his capacity for analysis. His connection to Hera Syndulla offered collaborative stability rather than distraction. Their partnership functioned as a model for balanced responsibility, illustrating that interdependence could strengthen rather than weaken a Jedi's clarity. This perspective provided an alternative to the Order's traditional approach, revealing that emotional connection did not inherently conflict with disciplined practice. His mentorship of Ezra Bridger further illustrated the value of an approach rooted in empathy rather than detachment. Kanan evaluated Ezra's background, motivations, and vulnerabilities before introducing structured training. Instead of treating Ezra as an asset to be shaped into a combatant, he assessed the broader implications of developing a young Force sensitive within an unstable political environment. His training emphasized self-awareness, accountability, and ethical reasoning rather than immediate tactical proficiency. This prioritization contrasted with wartime instruction models that often emphasized efficiency and obedience. By grounding instruction in personal understanding, Kanan created a learning environment that aligned with long-term stability rather than short-term utility. Kanan's willingness to reconsider his own judgments marked another key distinction between his method and the pre-war Order. Traditional Jedi often approached teaching from positions of authority, assuming that doctrine provided comprehensive answers to moral and practical questions. Kanan, by contrast, evaluated outcomes and adjusted his methods based on reflection. He acknowledged misjudgments, revised strategies, and communicated the reasoning behind changes to those he guided. This transparency allowed him to establish trust without relying on institutional hierarchy. The practice of integrating feedback into his development represented a model of leadership absent from the formal Jedi structure, which often viewed deviation from doctrine as error rather than opportunity for refinement. The transition from sight to blindness presented a turning point in Kanan's understanding of the Force. While the loss of vision restricted physical perception, it prompted a re-evaluation of how he engaged with the environment. This shift required reliance on sensory interpretation, rooted in the Force, rather than in conventional awareness. Instead of perceiving the Force as a directive or a source of control, Kanan interpreted it as an informational medium that required attention rather than exertion. This perspective aligned more closely with the Force's philosophical intent than many interpretations circulating within the late Republic. Through practice shaped by necessity rather than theory, Kanan demonstrated an understanding of the Force grounded in responsiveness and clarity. His interactions with the broader rebel network further emphasized his distinctive approach to leadership. Unlike the pre-war Jedi who often operated above the general population, Kanan engaged directly with civilians, insurgents, and political actors affected by imperial authority. He offered guidance informed by local realities rather than abstract principles. This practical orientation allowed him to assist others without relying on assumptions about their backgrounds or obligations. His integration into the rebellion demonstrated a model of service that prioritized social impact over institutional preservation. This focus stood in contrast to the pre-war Jedi, whose declining connection to the wider galaxy contributed to their eventual isolation. Kanan's decision-making demonstrated a consistent evaluation of risk that balanced immediate necessity with ethical intent. He did not interpret the Force as a guarantee of correct action, but as a tool requiring thoughtful application. The pre-war Jedi often relied on tradition or precedent to justify decisions, yet Kanan assessed each situation based on circumstances rather than inherited norms. This approach enabled him to operate effectively within environments marked by uncertainty and incomplete information. His actions reflected an understanding that responsible use of the Force required constant reassessment rather than rigid adherence to doctrine. This interpretation provided a model for operational flexibility lacking in the prior order. The structure of Kanan's mentorship also revealed a sophisticated understanding of maturity and autonomy. He recognized that Ezra's development required the opportunity to exercise independent judgment. Instead of expecting absolute compliance, Kanan integrated moments that allowed Ezra to evaluate consequences and refine understanding through experience. This method encouraged long-term responsibility rather than short-term obedience. The pre-war Jedi relied heavily on hierarchical progression with clearly defined roles, yet Kanan's approach allowed emerging abilities to develop within a framework that acknowledged individuality. This distinction highlighted a potential model for reform the Order had not explored. Kanan's training philosophy emphasized incremental progression rather than rigid benchmarks. He assessed growth through observation rather than standardized milestones. This focus on practical development contrasted with the formal evaluation systems used by the Jedi Council, which often emphasized adherence to predetermined criteria. By grounding development in the specific context of each learner, Kanan demonstrated a model of assessment that remained responsive to real conditions rather than theoretical structures. This flexibility reinforced the stability of his mentorship by aligning evaluation with actual progress rather than expected progress. This model of shared responsibility allowed different groups to coordinate without requiring uniform ideological alignment. The pre-war Jedi often struggled with decentralized operations, yet Kanan succeeded by embracing decentralized structures rather than resisting them. Kanan's mentorship of Ezra Bridger during active rebellion revealed detailed insights into his leadership methods. He recognized that Ezra's development required exposure to multiple viewpoints, not solely his own. By introducing Ezra to figures such as Captain Rex and members of other resistance groups, Kanan demonstrated an understanding that maturity emerges from diverse experiences rather than from singular instruction. This contrasted with the pre-war order, which often restricted Padawans to the worldview of a single master. Through this expanded mentorship model, Kanan provided Ezra with the intellectual flexibility necessary to navigate a galaxy defined by instability and competing moral claims. A key component of Kanan's leadership was his ability to integrate moral analysis into operational decision-making. During missions that required direct confrontation, he evaluated not only the tactical requirements, but also the broader implications of each choice. His understanding of risk encompassed civilian impact, team safety, long-term strategic positioning, and ethical coherence. Pre-war Jedi frequently operated according to doctrinal precedent, yet Kanan developed decisions through contextual reasoning. This method allowed him to adjust plans when new information emerged, preventing rigid adherence to outdated assumptions. As a result, his leadership remained responsive to immediate conditions, while grounded in long-term purpose. Kanan's adaptation to blindness further shaped his role within the rebellion. Instead of stepping back from leadership responsibilities, he recalibrated his methods to accommodate the change. He refined his reliance on non-visual perception, allowing him to maintain situational awareness and interpret environmental cues in ways that blended intuition with trained discipline. His willingness to integrate limitation with capability provided a model for resilience that strengthened the morale of the individuals he guided. The pre-war Jedi often interpreted physical impairment as an obstacle requiring transcendence, yet Kanan demonstrated that adaptation provided equal, if not greater, clarity. His participation in missions with high strategic stakes revealed an understanding of the relationship between local actions and broader political shifts. Rather than viewing each confrontation in isolation, Kanan assessed how each event affected emerging rebellion networks. He recognized that small victories held symbolic weight capable of inspiring resistance in remote sectors. This awareness informed his leadership approach, ensuring that tactical decisions aligned with broader strategic outcomes. The Order had once struggled to interpret the cumulative effects of isolated conflicts, yet Kanan consistently evaluated actions through a lens that integrated immediate needs with long-term objectives. Kanan's approach to conflict resolution deviated from the binary frameworks often applied by the pre-war Jedi. Rather than categorizing adversaries solely as threats requiring neutralization, he evaluated their conditions, motivations, and degrees of agency. He recognized that Imperial officers, local enforcers, and civilian collaborators functioned within systems shaped by coercion or limited choice. This perspective informed decisions that balanced firmness with strategic restraint. Such consideration allowed him to prevent unnecessary escalation and encourage de-escalation when possible. The pre-war Jedi often relied on uniform interpretations of threat, yet Kanan applied a more granular assessment that reflected the complexities of Imperial governance. His ability to communicate across cultural and ideological boundaries further strengthened his role within the early rebellion. Kanan engaged with Mandalorians, Lasats, Twi'leks, and other groups without imposing assumptions about their customs or priorities. He approached each interaction with awareness of historical context and political nuance. This inclusive leadership style allowed him to form alliances that supported both tactical and humanitarian objectives. The pre-war Jedi's limited engagement with diverse cultural groups had contributed to misunderstandings and reduced trust. Kanan's approach demonstrated an alternative model rooted in attentive communication rather than institutional projection. The culmination of Kanan's leadership emerged in decisions requiring personal risk for the benefit of others. When confronted with situations demanding high sacrifice, he evaluated options through a framework that integrated practical necessity with long-term outcomes. His choices reflected a willingness to assume responsibility for the safety of others, without expectation of recognition or institutional reward. This interpretation of leadership contrasted with earlier Jedi, who often framed sacrifice through the lens of duty rather than chosen responsibility. Kanan's decisions demonstrated that selflessness could emerge from interpersonal commitment rather than doctrinal obligation. The lasting significance of Kanan's approach becomes evident when assessing its impact on those who carried his teachings forward. The individuals he mentored continued to develop skills, perspectives, and ethical frameworks shaped by his influence. His methods did not end with his final act, but remained embedded within the operational philosophy of the team he helped form. This continuity reflects a model of leadership that extends beyond immediate outcomes. Rather than relying on metaphysical authority or institutional hierarchy, Kanan built a legacy rooted in applied understanding. The Jedi Order had sought to preserve knowledge through structure, preserved knowledge through practice. By comparing Kanan's leadership to the shortcomings of the pre-war Order, it becomes clear that he represented a model of Jedi practice more compatible with the needs of a galaxy entering a period of prolonged instability. His emphasis on adaptability, collaboration, situational awareness, and interpersonal understanding provided a framework that corrected many of the structural limitations that contributed to the Order's decline. While he did not operate with the formal authority once granted to Jedi Masters, his actions and decisions demonstrated the qualities the Order had claimed to embody. In this sense, Kanan's leadership did not replace traditional Jedi philosophy, but restored its foundational intent through practical application. The conclusion that emerges from this analysis is straightforward. Kanan Jarrus exemplified a version of the Jedi identity that adapted to the realities of a fractured galaxy without abandoning core ethical values. He provided guidance that integrated emotional understanding with strategic clarity, built alliances grounded in trust rather than hierarchy, and navigated moral complexity with measured reasoning rather than rigid doctrine. In doing so, he demonstrated that the principles the Jedi once defended remained viable when applied with flexibility and insight. Kanan represented the type of Jedi the Order could have become had it embraced evolution rather than preservation. His approach reflected the leadership the galaxy required, rather than the leadership the institution once assumed it provided.
Thank you for watching. Be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that share button. My main channel is Critical Analysis Hub, where I post Star Wars content about the movies. My secondary channel is Critical Analysis Hub Plus, where I focus on the shows of Star Wars. And my third channel is Critical Analysis Hub XP, where I post comic books. Be sure to take a moment and check them out. Thanks, and may the Force be with you.